London launch of the acclaimed photography book Vintage Addis Ababa took place at the Ethiopian Embassy in London on Thursday the 30th of May in the presence of Ethiopian Ambassador to the United Kingdom, His Excellency Mr. Fusaha Shawal Gebre, one of the book's editors, Philip Schultz, and more than 100 guests. Launched in July 2017, Vintage Addis Ababa is a documentary and fine art project that crowdsourced old photographs from the public, from wedding photographs to studio portraits and family photos, to tell the stories of everyday people in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, between the 1940s and the 1980s.
Basically, what Nafkot, Wangel and Philip tried to show was that even during our darkest hour, during the Red Terror, 1978-9, like when we were going through the worst of our times, life still went on. People were still having fun. People were still getting married. People were still celebrating their birthdays. People were still going on picnics. So what they tried to show was the resilience of Ethiopians in the face of adversity. So even when we were going through the darkest hour, we still found light in each other. So that's what they tried to show the world. And that's such a wonderful project. And that's why I helped them as a friend, not as any essential role or something, but as a friend. I just bought the idea and I supported it.
And essentially, as a communications person yourself, what do you think this book will communicate to not just our generation, but future generations to come after this?
Like that they should not be discouraged by the few things that are going bad at the moment. For example, like as we know, we are going through some rough times back home, and this gives people heart that okay, we've gone through this, and we are going through some rough times now, but it will also pass. So we should still enjoy life. We should still see the best in each other. The country will go on with or without that. The country was there before us. The country will be here after us. So we should embrace every moment and
so
enjoy
like a
and
message
cherish.
Of hope.
Exactly.
The concept is the brainchild of Addis Ababa-based photographers Philip Schultz, Wangel Ababa and Nafkot Gebeye, and aims to recount history from a more intimate and personal perspective. Through the digitisation and preservation of old photographs, the project has garnered fresh interest in the story of the Ethiopian capital, allowing Ethiopians today to revisit the story of the city through new eyes and for foreigners to get to know the everyday Ethiopia of yesterday. During the crowdfunding stage of the project, we spoke to Wangel Ababa, one of the book's editors.
One of the aims of the project is to, break this perception towards Ethiopia, locally as well as internationally. Primarily, our target audience is our local, especially the young people, to really tell them about what the country was like, what life was like in history, because the history books don't tell us what life really was like on, everyday people's perspective. So one reason is to bridge the generational gap that has been, created these days, which has also brought about this being washed away of our identity and our values, as Ethiopians. So it's one way to pass down these stories and these values from the older generation to the younger generation. And then internationally, we also want to show that, our history has been tainted in a way that history focuses on either the dark stuff, or really we've seen a lot of the elite, or we've seen what they, what they wear, what they dress, what they do, what they look like, but we really don't know what the commoners were doing or what their hope was. So it's this project kind of fills the gap in our minds that connects the dots that haven't been usually recorded in photo books, in the international media, or even in the history books.
The photography book was officially launched in Addis Ababa on the 17th of November 2018 at the Alliance Ethio-Française of Addis Ababa, and has already sold more than 700 copies worldwide. Back here in London, His Excellency Ambassador Fessa Herschel Gebre welcomed guests to the launch.
We have to look at the best part of our history, as any country has got its own ups and downs, and we have passed through the same experience. But for the next generation, it is good to take lessons from what went wrong, but we magnify what is positive so that the next generation would be free from our past that had a problem. Rather, they have to enjoy the past that is good about us. We had leaders, we had people. I saw Haile Selassie in this book, and I saw Mengistu in it. I saw ordinary people. I saw kids with a gun taking photo, and so many other stories, which is really beautiful. And I share part of it. In the 80s and 90s, I was a grown-up, and I took some photos similar to it, black and white. So it gives me a very good memory about myself, about my country. So I really want to thank you, Philip. You continue the good job you are doing, but you should not limit yourself to Addis Ababa. Next time you will come with a new idea, a new project, a new book, if you like. But I want to assure you, as an ambassador here, and my team, the embassy, and my own Ethiopian colleagues and others will be behind you to support you with whatever good intention you are coming with, always good. I assure you to help you. And do help me in explaining Ethiopia through such works. You are doing my job. I thank you very much.
The book explores facets of a bygone era hidden from mainstream history and presents an intimate cross-section of life in Ethiopia's capital through 242 images and their accompanying stories. Philip Schutz spoke at the launch.
And so how did this whole journey begin in terms of your interest in Ethiopia? Why did you choose to do this kind of project in Ethiopia? Do you have a previous relationship with the country?
Yeah, I've been there like 7 years. By the time I guess we started talking about this project, it was like 3 years ago. I had been in the country for 4 years. And I was inspired by something similar that was done in Uganda. And I liked how these projects basically, how these photos show just a different angle. I think the Ethiopia that we know, the old Ethiopia from photos, it's either the negative, violent regime change in the mid-70s and everything, the civil war. So it's either a lot of negative images, or it's also just the elite, like Haile Selassie and the emperor, people that were close to him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So with this photo, as you can see, it's kind of everyday people, people of Addis of these days, and their photos and their stories, and it's a lot more candid, intimate than the photos that were taken by journalists at that time. Since these were private photos that were actually never meant to be public that much, or they were just people's private moments, but they've now become very interesting to look at.
And what do you think the book can offer to Ethiopia today? It's obviously retrospective in terms of looking back on everyday life in Ethiopia during the 60s and 70s, a fascinating time. But how about for today's Ethiopia? It's a very different Ethiopia that we have. And what do you think the book can do for us?
I think we were really inspired by the commitment of these elderly people. We talked to people now that are in their late 80s, people that have lived through very intense times. In the late 70s, we've met people who've married at the height of Red Terror, who married during a time where there was a lot of fear. So there are a lot of stories in the book of people that had really strong values and were committed to life, in community, that helped one another, served one another. People opening up interesting businesses, collaborating, and public servants, and just a lot of people that were really dedicated to Ethiopia. Some of them went abroad to study but came back, and it was just paints a really interesting picture of the past, how people work together to make the city a better place. And I think that's everyone that can draw from that these days as well, even though, as you said, Addis has moved on and no longer looks like this.
Yes, exactly. And there was one particular picture, I think it's up here. It's the picture of this young man with a gun. If you could explain to us the story behind that picture.
Yeah, so that photo, I think we also received that, I think it was a friend of my colleagues who sent that in. And basically it was his second birthday. I think his name is Selo Wyndham. And it was his second birthday. His father gave him a gun just to pose for the photo, but the gun was loaded. So then the kid actually fires, and the boy apparently almost injured himself or hit himself with the bullet. And since then the family remembers kind of the day as no longer his birthday, but kind of as a joke, they say the day he survived.
The period in which many of the photos were taken was a fascinating time in Ethiopian history. Addis Ababa, the nation's capital, was the location of important political events, from the first conference for the Organisation of African Unity in 1963 to the 1974 coup, which overthrew the monarchy. But at the same time, people still lived the everyday experience: a fashion show at the Hilton, a moment in a photo studio at Mercato, a concert at Yared School of Music, house parties, a wedding at Kidis Selassie, a graduation photo outside Addis Ababa University, street scenes at Piazza, private and intimate moments at home. We also caught up with guests at the launch for their views on the project.
And this is a form of communication. They are communicating hope, they are communicating about the resilience of Ethiopians even in the face of adversity, and I believe I will be supporting such projects at many levels, because there is no one silver bullet that will fix our problems. We need to tackle our multiple problems in many different ways and channels. So this is one. There need to be so many other documentaries made, there need to be books written, there need to be photo exhibitions organized. So I will be supporting those kinds of things, because I really believe in the power of communication to give hope to the people, to transform our nation into one in which we understand each other, into one in which we see the beauty in diversity. So anything that directs this country in that direction, I will be supporting it.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.
As the well-known writer Maaza Mengistu notes in her foreword to the book, to look through Vintage Addis Ababa is to get a hint of all that stays frozen and fixed in a camera's frame. It is to see the ways that life evolved as Ethiopia underwent profound change. The book can be ordered online directly from the Vintage Addis Ababa website, www.vintageaddis.com. You can also follow them on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our channel by clicking on the subscription button below. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for daily updates from the Embassy.